Okay, this video is about Montell points, as the title would suggest. And I've got a bunch of them stacked up over here. These are actual artifacts that were loaned to me. They're all from the same site. This site here. I don't know if all the material is from the same site. It probably is. I would imagine that some of it is from different areas, but I'm going to make an assumption that most of this is local material, and whatever needed to be heat treated is heat treated. Now, a lot of these pieces appear to be raw to me, but that's just subjective from me working with heat treated and raw stone, both in good proportions. So I'll just take a guess. If I know, or if I think I know, I'll let you know if it's heated or not. There's some that are obviously heated when they've got fire pops and fire damage, like this one here. Now, this is heated, but it's probably heat treated, or not heat treated, but heat exposed after the fact. So we got some of those. Okay, so I'm assuming all these are Montell. That might not even be a Montell, but it's close. It could be Martindale or something like that. Anyway, I'm going to go through. Most of these are broken. In fact, I don't have any whole pieces. I've got some that are pretty close, and I'm going to weigh some of these. Okay, so we can get an idea. Okay, so let me start here. I'll let you know if there's something that I can see right away that is characteristic of a Montell. But I've only made, let's say, a dozen of them, so I'm not all that well versed in how they are made. One thing is, these were made presumably starting with the base first and then the blade finished after. Okay, like this one here. Now, I don't know if this was broken in construction or broken in use. I mean, they may have used it as a cutting blade before they finished it out as a Montell, but I'm going to make the assumption that all these points that are broken like this in these upcoming videos are broken in construction or during the reduction process. Just going to make the assumption, and if there's a glaring obvious thing later that you guys can see in the video that would say otherwise, then, you know, put the comment down below, or if I notice it, I'll make the correction. Okay. So these would appear to be made base first as far as notching and shaping. Obviously the blade is thinned first, and then the edges are finished later. You can see on this one here, the edges are still crude. They haven't been thinned down or sharpened up like some of these other ones. Let's see if I can get a good one here. It's comparable, the base is comparable in size, right? But you can see how refined the edge is on this one compared to that one. The edges all the way around, on the edges of the base, the stem here, it's a much more refined than this one here. So this one is obviously in process, okay? And these are still crude, whereas these are rounded off. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of how it looked like during the reduction process. Now there's a bit of a high spot on this side. Okay, most of these are very thin, so obviously they would have continued to try to thin that down on this one here. Some of these in here are kind of thick, but not in the blade. See that? Very thin blade. The bases on these are sometimes thick, but the blade is usually not. And there's not really much retouch to sharpen the blade. You know what I mean? There really isn't that much work done on the edge to get it sharp because it was already thin to begin with. Okay, so there's that one. The width on this, a little over 2 1/4. Thickness, was that 5/16? Yeah. Okay, so you guys can work out the width to thickness ratio. This base is almost pristine. So I'm going to take a measurement here. So this was like 1 3/4 by 3/16. If I make a mistake with these measurements, you guys forgive me, please. But it's on video, so you can just rewind the video or whatever and get the right measurement. There's another one that's, I can't tell if this is partially completed or fully completed because the edges are kind of sharp and very thin. I don't know if that was broken in construction or not. But it looks pretty pristine, so I'll take a measurement. The reason why I say that is some of these other ones have broken off barbs and are resharpened. So if that's a question out there where Montell's resharpened, yeah, I've got a few in here that are like that. This is a little less than 1 3/4. And a little bit less than 1/4. Now some of these flakes were taken very late in the process. Like this one here. See that? That was one of the last flakes taken because you can see where there's a slight bulb of percussion and it narrows down to where you can tell there's not much working of that initiation point. Whereas on the other side, like on this one here, see how it doesn't go in, it's not as pointy. That means there was edge work done to eliminate some of the edge. But on this one here, you can see that's one of the last ones taken because you can see where the initiation point was. If that makes sense. Now if I continue to work this edge and chip it back, you wouldn't see as much of a point on that flake scar. Now you can see these edges are not perfect. And it may have needed one more pass, but it's hard to tell. You can see that some of these have, little bitty micro flaking, but I don't know if that's from use or actual flaking with a tool. Some of you guys are better at seeing that than I am. Now this edge looks reworked quite a bit because there's no initiations like this where you can see the whole original flake scar. Most of these look like there's some working back of the edge on this one here. So this looks reworked to some extent. Okay. It's got a good patina on it. It's common to see more patina on one side than the other. I don't know why, but it's pretty common. Okay, I need to stop talking so much and just get through this. It's already 10 minutes. Now, this may be a inclusion in the stone, or it might be due to a heat. It looks like this is a partially popped flake in there, but that may just be an inclusion in the stone. I don't know what that is. Most of this material, I would say, is translucent like this. Some of it more than others, but you get the idea. The patina kind of blocks from you seeing the sun through that one. Okay. All right, this is another one that has a very nice completed base, but not a completed blade. And you can almost see the shape of the tool that was used to make that notch. You know, at least you know the tool could not have been wider than that notch. You can kind of see the shape by looking at the base of that notch. So either the punch or the pressure flaking tool was not very wide. And especially this little pop out here on the middle of the stem here. There we go. You can see how narrow that tool was. Which is kind of cool. On a lot of these you can see the shape of the tool for these notchings. Alright, so the base looks pretty well done. This part here, these barbs maybe not, but you can see there's some pressure work done on this edge, and mostly percussion on this edge. There's hardly any pressure work at all. There may have been some, brushing and that kind of thing going on with an abrading stone or something, because it's not very sharp on this edge. It's kind of sharp. It's much sharper on this one. Let's do a measurement. So I would say this is like first stage and probably broken in manufacture. Okay, a little over 2 1/4. Thickest part is a little over 1/4, 5/16. There's a dip, kind of a dip in this side, a little bit rounded up on this side. There's a lump there. If I was making this point, I would see that there's, still a pretty good amount of mass here. I would probably take back this edge, make it suitable for a flake to be run across and try to get that lump off. But either it was broken in manufacture during the knapping, or it fell down, or they stashed it in a cache or something and it broke. This looks like one of the last flakes taken here. I'm not sure what that is. It's some kind of lettering or a number made with a Sharpie or something. Okay, so this looks like one of the last flakes taken here. It's hard to tell where or how it broke. But the base is very nice. Okay. This one here also, I think, was broken in manufacture. It's just an odd break though. It could be because it's a heat-treated material and it's very brittle. Or it could have been multiple breaks. Some of these, as they throw them away or whatever, could have a secondary break. Yeah, this one looks to me like it was base first. Worked on the base first and then the blade broke. during manufacture. And you can see this pop out. See that pop out there? You can kind of see the shape of the tool used, and then the resulting flake on the other side. That's the kind of stuff I look for in order to get something strong enough to pressure flake that thickness. I have to get the highest quality elk antler that I can get my hands on, because otherwise I can't punch in or pressure flake in a notch that deep unless it's a very tough material on my pressure flaker. All right, thickness is almost 3/8. Width 2 1/8. Now these bases, none of these, these stems are not very deep. I don't know if there's an average of those. I don't know if they measured. That's a 1/2 inch or thereabouts. This one has a kind of a deeper base. What is that? 9/16? 1/2 inch plus a 1/16. But a lot of these Montells, they don't have really long stems. Okay. Start getting through these. Very thin. I think this may have been completed and broken in during use. I don't see any secondary breakage on the bottom here. And these are not perfectly symmetrical. Sometimes this lobe or this bifurcated part of the stem is thicker than the other part. These are not consistent. They're not made so that they're perfectly consistent. And sometimes they're flat like this on one side and bulgy on the other side, which means the notch either has to be a V at some sort of skewed angle or a square bottom notch. Okay, it's not a perfect V into the foreshaft, because if you put this in a perfect V, it's going to tilt this way. You know what I mean? Because it's bulkier on this side than this side. So it's either a square bottom notch where you can manipulate this and fit it into the bottom by just turning it. There's room at the bottom of the notch, or they just made a V in that same direction as the base. Now see, these are very pointy barbs, and some of these completed ones, let's see if I don't know if I have one or not. They're not as pointy. So this may have been worked down. It doesn't look like it's all that worked down to me, but it may have started with thicker or wider barbs and then, worked down to these pointy barbs. Or it could have started out this way. There's some variation on these, obviously. These are approximately the same size, but the barbs will look a little different. Now, what's the width on these stems? A little over 1 1/8. Now we've got some that are very small. This one is about 3/4. Yeah. Okay, so there, you can see there's quite a bit of difference. Now, whether this is a Montell or not, it's hard to tell. Some of these types look like each other. This could be maybe a Jetta or something, and it just looks like a Montell. But if these lobes are kind of squared off at the bottom, we tend to think it's a Montell. Okay, here's another one with a definite Montell profile and a narrow stem. A little over 3/4. Let's see, the widest stem I have here, probably this one. 1 1/16. This might be the widest. A little over 1 1/8. This one is 1 inch. So there's going to be a lot of little ones like this. Okay, let's just start getting through those. Here's another one with pointy barbs, translucent, just like this other one. Looks like the same kind of material. Nice edge work. Kind of jaggedy, not really sharp, not like a early triangular. Early triangular points are extremely sharp. This is not as sharp as those, but the thinness is in line with the thinnest points that I can find as far as artifacts go. Okay, this is a little over 1.5 inches and 3/16 thick. So that's very well made, very flat. The base is symmetrical as far as the thickness of each of these lobes. So it's a very well made one. Now, I've seen a couple with twisted blades, but this one has a very straight one. Okay. I'm going to put the small ones over on this side. Let's see. Another small one here. You don't see too many with flutes. This one is really not a flute. But you do see a lot of, heavy duty pressure pop-outs or punch pop-outs on these. But not much fluting like a Pedernales point. This one has very sharp edges. But as you can see, I mean, the technique for sharpening these is not very sophisticated. It's not like a Folsom point where you have, very careful, very minute flakes all in a row. No, this is haphazard and random. And it may have even been reworked slightly, because this is a little bit duller than this side. This one here, a little bit of an odd break, but the base is perfect. It's kind of crude, this edge is kind of crude, so it tells me it was probably broken in manufacture. Semi-translucent. Very squared off lobes. You can see the shape of the tool. Hopefully there's not a lot of glare. I'm looking over the camera to see, but I should be looking through the camera to see if it's actually in focus. And then you can see the pop out here. I think most of these were done with heavy pressure. As far as the final notching, it may have started with some punch work, but I think the final notching is done with pressure. Even with something that's that drastic of a pop out like this, I don't think they were punched in. I can generate a pressure flake like this. Now, I haven't been saying if I think these are heat treated or not, because it's really hard to tell. I really need to feel the edges. The best way for me to tell if it's heat treated is just to touch the edges and see what the edges feel like. If they are kind of jaggedy and very grippy, like if it's like a saw blade, and very hard, the points are very hard, it's most likely raw. But if it cuts, if it's still cutting very well, and it's not as grippy, if it's kind of smoother, so to speak, like a refined blade feel, then I think it's heat treated. Sometimes you can tell by the color change, but a lot of this material does not change color when heat treated. Even when it starts with a lighter color, it just stays the same. Okay. Rarely does this type of material, especially this root beer looking stuff, that doesn't change color when heat treated. And some of it doesn't need heat treating at all. And some of it only needs a little bit. So there's a whole big spectrum of how you can heat treat these. Some of them need a lot, some of them don't. Some of them need very little, and it changes the characteristics drastically with just a little bit of heat. And some you need a lot of heat to change it just a little bit as far as knappability goes. Okay. Again, you can see a lot of the, let me see. You can tell the shape of the pressure flaking tool or whatever. Okay, before we hit 30 minutes here, I'm going to weigh some of these. The ones that are almost complete, this will be in grains. So sorry about that, you grams guys. All right, so that's 114. 154, 138, and 220. Okay, quite a range. And I would say that the actual weight is maybe 10% more than what I said. Okay, because these are not complete. Maybe 5%. Add 5% to it or something. Whatever you guys think. You can see that not much is missing from these, just the tips and barbs in most cases. Now this one, I've worked some of this material, this tan color stuff, and it does need heat. So I would say that this is heat treated. Little over 3/4. Okay, but I'm not going to measure all of these. I don't want to run too much over 30 minutes. But you can get the idea of the edge work, the thinness. This kind of material responds well to heat. It can be worked raw, of course. All of this material can be worked raw. But some of it becomes extremely good with heat. Now this one, again, it's hard to say. This probably is raw. I'm saying that mainly because it's thick. Just the feel of it, which is highly subjective, but just the feel of it tells me that when you're working raw material with antler and bone, it's very difficult to get it thin. Whereas this one here is very thin. So it tells me, or it indicates there's a high probability of being heat treated, because heat treatment helps you get it thin. Almost 1 3/8 by 3/16. Yeah. This one is pretty thin too. I can't get a width on that, but the thickest part is right here. It's not down at the base. Some of these have the thickest part down at the base, so there's quite a bit of variability. If that's a word. Quite a bit of variation. If I can get it to focus. See how this one has a very, very thin base and this one doesn't? But the blades are similar in thickness. So the proportions vary, the stem thicknesses vary, the stem widths vary, everything is variable. Now, what do I think these were used for? These smaller ones, I think they were all projectile points. And most of the big ones were also projectile points. But I would tend to think that the bigger you get, the more likely it is it was used as a knife. Okay, there's some odd ones here that have some breaks. That these may not be Montells. Like this one might not be a Montell. But you know, it's found in the same layer of stratification on the same site, so it probably is a Montell. This one here, it's hard to tell. But it looks like heat damage after the fact. And one of the lobes is broken off. Either through fire damage or just someone stepped on it or whatever. When you first look at it, you don't know what's going on with it, but then if you hold it just right, you can kind of see that this is one side of the blade, this is the other side of the blade. This is one tooth, so to speak, and then another tooth is broken off. This one's partially broken off. Now, I haven't discussed what I think might be breaks in the hafting area on impact. This one looks like a hafting break with it, you know, an impact snap, because there's some secondary damage on the edge. This looks like a completed point that has some damage to one tooth, and the blade snapped because of impact. Okay, projectile point impact. This one's kind of crude. It may have even been discarded before it even was used, broken in manufacture. Yeah, I was afraid of that. I don't want to do that too often because I've got concrete down there. So yeah, I'm just going to go through these quickly. I think I've taken enough measurements to give you an idea. This may even be a Frio type pointer. If they exist together, but I need to stop the video right here. I'll continue on the next one.